Somewhere in the state of Georgia, there is a canyon so large, so colorful, and so dramatic that most people who see photos of it assume it must be in Arizona. It plunges nearly 300 feet into the earth, stretches almost 3 miles across, and its walls glow in shades of pink, red, purple, and white. It looks ancient. It looks geological. It looks like it took millions of years to form. It did not. Farmers did this, bad farmers specifically. And that is just the beginning of what this video is going to show you about the hidden, bizarre, and genuinely unbelievable geography hiding inside the borders of the United States. Hi, my name is Henry, and this is States Explained. Providence Canyon, Georgia's Little Grand Canyon. Georgia is not a state you associate with canyons. When most Americans think of Georgia, they think of peaches, Atlanta traffic, the Okefenokee Swamp, maybe the Masters golf tournament, if that is your thing. What they do not think of is a canyon system so visually stunning that it has been nicknamed the Little Grand Canyon of the East. But in the southwestern corner of the state, near the small town of Lumpkin, sits Providence Canyon State Park, and it is one of the most striking landscapes in the entire eastern United States. Here is the thing that makes Providence Canyon genuinely remarkable and genuinely a little embarrassing for the state of Georgia. It should not exist. Not because the geology is wrong or because the landscape is unusual, but because this canyon, all 280 feet of it, all 16 individual gullies of it, did not exist 200 years ago. When European settlers first arrived in this part of Georgia in the early 1800s, this land was flat. Not flat like Colorado Plains flat, just flat Georgia farmland, covered in soil, perfectly unremarkable. And then people started farming it. The soils of southwestern Georgia, it turns out, are extremely vulnerable to erosion. The region sits on a layer of relatively soft, sandy soil that, when left alone, is held in place by tree roots, vegetation, and the natural absorption of rainwater. The Cherokee and Creek peoples who had lived in this region for centuries understood this, either consciously or through generations of land management, and they did not strip the landscape bare. The settlers who arrived in the early 1800s did. They cleared enormous amounts of land for cotton farming, which makes sense economically, but is catastrophic geologically. Cotton farming requires you to remove nearly everything else, and without root systems holding the soil in place, rainwater does not absorb. It runs. And when water runs across exposed sandy soil on a slope, it carves. At first, it was small ditches. Farmers noticed them, ignored them, plowed around them. By the mid-1800s, the ditches had become gullies. By the late 1800s, the gullies were several feet deep. By the early 1900s, some of them were tens of feet deep. And by the time anyone thought to actually pay serious attention to what was happening in this corner of Georgia, the canyon system was already over 100 feet deep in places and still growing. Farmers eventually abandoned the land entirely, which, honestly, was probably the only responsible decision made in this entire story. The state of Georgia took over the land in 1971, designating it a state park. And here is the genuinely wild part. Because the land had been abandoned for decades, and because Georgia's climate is warm and wet and extremely good at growing things, the walls, ahas, and floor of the canyon had started to be colonized by vegetation. Rare and unusual plants began to grow in the protected microclimate of the canyon walls. Today, Providence Canyon is home to at least 16 species of wild azaleas, some of which do not grow anywhere else in the world outside of this accidental canyon. The thing that was created by environmental destruction became, through abandonment, a refuge for rare plant life. Nature is strange. The walls of the canyon are also visually extraordinary in a way that photographs barely do justice. Because the erosion has cut through different geological layers, the colors of the exposed soil change dramatically as you descend. The upper layers are white and gray. Deeper layers shift into pink and orange. At the bottom, in some sections, the walls glow a deep red or a rusty purple, depending on the iron content of the soil and the angle of the light. People hike into this canyon and genuinely cannot believe they are in Georgia. They genuinely cannot believe they are not in Utah. The Little Grand Canyon nickname is both a tourism pitch and, if you are standing at the rim looking down at those colored walls, a pretty fair description. The canyon is also still growing, slowly, which is either terrifying or fascinating, depending on your relationship with geological time. Rain still carves. Soil still moves. What started as a farmer's drainage ditch in the early 1800s is now approaching 300 feet deep in places. There is a lesson in here somewhere about soil conservation and the long-term consequences of land management decisions. I will let you draw your own conclusions, but it is a fairly loud lesson. Straddling the border between Texas and Louisiana, there is a lake unlike almost any other in the United States. Caddo Lake is the only naturally formed lake in Texas. It covers around 25,000 acres of water, cypress swamps, and bayous. But what makes Caddo Lake genuinely extraordinary, what makes it feel less like a lake in the American South and more like something out of a fantasy novel, is what is growing out of it. Bald cypress trees, some of them over 100 feet tall, rise directly out of the water across enormous stretches of the lake. Their trunks widen dramatically at the base, flaring out into strange root structures called cypress knees that jut up out of the water around them, like a small crowd of wooden stalagmites. Moss hangs from every branch. The light that filters through the canopy onto the dark water below is greenish and dim, even in the middle of the day. Paddling a canoe through the interior channels of Caddo Lake feels, I am completely serious about this, like paddling through a cathedral that has been partially flooded. It is one of the most atmospheric and visually overwhelming natural environments in the country, and most Americans have never heard of it. The cypress forest exists because Caddo Lake is extremely shallow, averaging only around 8 to 10 feet deep across most of its surface area, shallow enough for cypress trees to root in the lake bed and grow upward through the water into open air. The trees are not drowning. This is their preferred habitat. Bald cypress trees are among the most flood-tolerant trees in North America, and in the warm, swampy conditions of the Texas and Louisiana border, they can live for extraordinary lengths of time. Some of the individual trees growing in Caddo Lake are estimated to be over 100 years old. A few may be significantly older than that. The lake itself has an interesting origin story. The Caddo people, a Native American confederacy from whom the lake takes its name, had lived on and around this body of water for centuries and considered it sacred. According to Caddo oral tradition, the lake was created by a great earthquake that caused the land to sink and the water to rise. That is not entirely wrong. The New Madrid seismic zone, a major fault system that runs through the central United States, produced a series of massive earthquakes in 1811 and 1812, among the largest earthquakes in recorded North American history. There is evidence that these earthquakes significantly affected water levels and drainage patterns throughout the region. Whether the earthquakes created Caddo Lake outright or dramatically altered an existing body of water is debated, but the Caddo oral tradition of the ground sinking and the waters rising turns out to be, geologically speaking, reasonably accurate. Which, as origin stories go, is pretty remarkable. What is less romantic but also part of Caddo Lake's history is that the lake was further shaped and maintained for much of the 19th and early 20th century by a massive logjam on the Red River, known as the Great Raft. This logjam, which was hundreds of miles long and had been accumulating for centuries, backed up water across the entire region and helped maintain the lake's depth and extent. When the Army Corps of Engineers cleared the Great Raft in the 1870s, Caddo Lake began to shrink dramatically. It was only the construction of a dam in 1914 that restored the water levels and preserved the cypress forest as it exists today. So Caddo Lake is simultaneously a natural wonder, a geological accident, possibly an earthquake's legacy, and partly a product of dam construction. It contains multitudes. The disappearing coast of Louisiana. Every state in the United States with a coastline is dealing in some way with the effects of sea level rise and coastal erosion. This is not news. What is happening in Louisiana, though, is happening at a scale and speed that is categorically different from almost anywhere else in the country, and understanding why requires understanding how the Louisiana coast was built in the first place. The Louisiana coastline is not ancient bedrock. It is not granite cliffs or limestone bluffs. It is mud. Specifically, it is a vast delta system built up over thousands of years by the Mississippi River depositing sediment as it flows into the Gulf of Mexico. Every time the Mississippi flooded, it spread sediment across the surrounding land. Every time it shifted course, which major rivers do over geological timescales, it built new land in a new direction. The wetlands and barrier islands of southern Louisiana are essentially a pile of river sediment that happens to be above sea level. And sediment, unlike bedrock, compresses. It sinks. It requires constant replenishment to stay in place. For thousands of years, that replenishment came naturally from Mississippi River floods. Then, starting in the early 20th century, the Army Corps of Engineers built an extensive system of levees along the Mississippi River to prevent flooding and protect the cities and farmland along its banks. This made enormous economic sense. It also stopped the river from depositing sediment onto the surrounding land. The sediment that used to spread across Louisiana's wetlands now flows straight down the channelized river and dumps into the deep water of the Gulf of Mexico, where it is useless for land building. At the same time, the oil and gas industry drilled tens of thousands of wells across coastal Louisiana, crisscrossing the wetlands with canals that allowed salt water to intrude deep into freshwater marshes, killing the vegetation that held the wetlands together. The result is that Louisiana is losing land at a rate that has no parallel in the continental United States. Since the 1930s, the state has lost over 2,000 square miles of land. That is an area roughly the size of Delaware. Gone. Converted from wetland to open water in less than a century. Entire communities that existed on maps 30 years ago are now underwater. Islands that fishermen used as landmarks have vanished. The town of Isle de Jean-Charles in Terrebonne Parish has lost 98% of its land area since 1955. The small community that lives there is one of the first groups of climate refugees in the United States, receiving federal funding to relocate inland because the land beneath their homes is literally disappearing. What makes this additionally complicated is that Louisiana's coastal wetlands serve as a buffer protecting the rest of the state from hurricane storm surge. Every mile of wetland a hurricane passes over before reaching land absorbs some of the storm's energy. As the wetlands disappear, cities like New Orleans become more vulnerable to exactly the kind of catastrophic flooding that Hurricane Katrina demonstrated in 2005. The disappearing coast is not just an environmental issue. It is a disaster preparedness issue, an infrastructure issue, and a human displacement issue simultaneously. And Louisiana is living through it right now. Nebraska has sand dunes, and I need you to accept this. I want you to picture Nebraska. Take a moment. I assume you are picturing flat farmland, corn, maybe a highway, possibly a grain elevator. You are probably not picturing a vast landscape of grass-covered sand dunes stretching across nearly 20,000 square miles of the north-central part of the state. And yet, that is exactly what the Nebraska Sandhills are. The Nebraska Sandhills are the largest sand dune formation in the Western Hemisphere. They cover roughly 1/4 of the entire state of Nebraska. Individual dunes reach heights of over 300 feet. The reason most people have never thought of Nebraska as a sand dune landscape is that the dunes are almost entirely covered in grass, which stabilizes them and makes them look, from a distance or from a highway, like rolling green hills. Underneath that grass, though, is sand. A lot of sand. More sand than most people would ever comfortably associate with the state of Nebraska. The dunes formed over thousands of years during periods when the Great Plains were significantly drier than they are today. Wind picked up sand from the beds of ancient rivers and piled it into dunes. During wetter periods, grass colonized the dunes and stabilized them. During drier periods, the grass died back and the dunes became active again, shifting and moving with the wind. The dunes we see today in the sandhills are largely stabilized by grass, but they are not permanently stable. Drought can kill the grass cover and reactivate the dunes. There is geological evidence of multiple episodes in the last few thousand years when large portions of the sandhills were active, shifting desert dunes, completely hostile to the kind of cattle ranching that the region supports today. Today, the sandhills are one of the most important ecological regions in the Great Plains. The sand acts as an enormous natural water filter. Rainwater percolates down through the dunes into the massive Ogallala aquifer beneath. The wetlands and lakes scattered throughout the sandhills, hundreds of them, are fed by that groundwater and support an extraordinary diversity of wildlife. The region is especially important for migratory birds. The Platte River, which runs along the southern edge of the sandhills, is one of the most significant stopover points for migratory birds in North America. Each spring, somewhere between 400,000 and 600,000 sandhill cranes congregate along the Platte River in one of the largest wildlife migrations in the world, in Nebraska. I know. The Salton Sea, California's accidental inland ocean. In the southeastern corner of California, in the middle of the desert, below sea level, there is a lake roughly the size of Rhode Island. It is salty, it smells, it is dying, and it was created entirely by a broken irrigation canal. This is the Salton Sea, and its story is one of the more genuinely bizarre chapters in American geographic history. The area where the Salton Sea sits today is called the Salton Sink, a below-sea level depression in the desert that was created by the same geological forces that form the Gulf of California. For most of its recent history, it was dry, or nearly dry. The ancient Colorado River had historically flowed through this region and occasionally filled the sink with water. But by the time American settlers arrived in the late 1800s, it was mostly a dry salt flat. The Imperial Valley to the south, though, had extraordinarily fertile soil if you could get water to it. And in the early 1900s, engineers began diverting water from the Colorado River into a system of irrigation canals designed to turn the desert into farmland. In 1905, an intake gate on one of these canals failed. Then, another failed. Engineers tried to fix them, and they made things worse. Within weeks, the entire flow of the Colorado River had been redirected into the Imperial Valley, and it had nowhere to go except downhill into the Salton Sink. For the next 2 years, the full force of the Colorado River poured into the desert. By the time engineers finally managed to redirect the river back to its original course in 1907, the Salton Sea had been created. It was 35 miles long, 15 miles wide, and in some places 80 feet deep. A brand new lake in the middle of the California desert, created entirely by accident. For several decades, the Salton Sea was actually a success story of sorts. Fish were introduced, the lake supported enormous populations of birds, and resort communities developed along its shores. In the 1950s and the 1960s,
It was a legitimate tourist destination. Frank Sinatra performed there. The Beach Boys went there. For a moment, the Salton Sea genuinely competed with Palm Springs as a Southern California getaway. Then the problem started. The Salton Sea has no outlet. Water flows in from agricultural runoff, but can only leave through evaporation, which concentrates the salts and agricultural chemicals that come with the runoff. Over the decades, the lake has become saltier than the Pacific Ocean. Fish populations collapsed. The smell of algae blooms and decomposing fish became overwhelming. The resort towns emptied out. Today, the Salton Sea is one of the most ecologically troubled bodies of water in the country, shrinking as agricultural water use decreases, exposing dry lake bed that contains decades worth of agricultural pesticides and fertilizers, which then blow as dust into surrounding communities. It is a full-scale environmental disaster, and it started because an irrigation gate broke in 1905.
The town that has been on fire for 60 years. In 1962, in the small coal mining town of Centralia, Pennsylvania, someone lit a fire in a landfill. This was not unusual. Open burning of trash was common practice in small towns at the time. What was unusual about Centralia is that the landfill happened to be sitting on top of an exposed seam of anthracite coal, and the fire spread into the coal seam. The coal seam connected underground to a vast network of abandoned mine tunnels running beneath the entire town. And nobody could put it out. Centralia sits in the coal country of eastern Pennsylvania, a region that was mined intensively throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. The mines beneath Centralia were largely abandoned by the time of the fire, but they were not empty. They were full of coal, oxygen, and connected passageways that allowed fire to spread in every direction underground. Various attempts were made to extinguish the fire in the 1960s and 1970s. None of them worked. The fire moved through the coal seams faster and more unpredictably than engineers could map it. By the early 1980s, the consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. Carbon monoxide levels in homes were dangerously high. Sinkholes began opening up as the ground above the burning coal collapsed. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski nearly died when the ground suddenly opened up beneath him in his grandmother's backyard, dropping him into a steaming sinkhole that went down over 150 feet into the burning earth. He grabbed tree roots and held on until a cousin pulled him out. I genuinely cannot imagine how that conversation went at dinner that night. Congress appropriated $42 million in 1984 to relocate Centralia's residents, and most of them left. The population of Centralia, which had been around 1,000 people in 1980, dropped to just a few dozen by the 1990s. Today, the official population is around 5 people, making Centralia one of the smallest municipalities in Pennsylvania. Most of the buildings have been demolished. Streets that once ran through the town end in fields of weeds, but steam still rises from cracks in the ground. The roads are buckled and broken. According to the Office of Surface Mining, the underground fire could continue burning for another 250 years before it runs out of fuel. The town of Centralia, Pennsylvania, has been on fire underground for over 60 years. It will likely be on fire for centuries after everyone alive today is gone. And it all started because someone burned their trash. The fire also, somewhat indirectly, inspired the video game and film franchise Silent Hill, which is set in an abandoned town built over an underground coal fire. So Centralia has that going for it. That and not much else. The Carolina Bays, America's greatest unsolved geographic mystery. Across the coastal plain of North and South Carolina and scattered into Georgia, Virginia, Maryland, and as far west as Nebraska, there are hundreds of thousands of shallow, oval-shaped depressions in the earth. They range in size from a few acres to several miles across. They are all oriented in roughly the same direction, northwest to southeast. Almost all of them have a raised, sandy rim on their southeastern edge. Many of them are wetlands or ponds. And nobody, despite decades of scientific study, has fully agreed on how they got there. These are the Carolina Bays, and they are one of the genuinely mysterious geographic features of the United States. They were first formally described by scientists in the 1930s, when aerial photography became widespread enough that someone finally looked at the coastal plain of the Carolinas from above and noticed that the landscape was covered in hundreds of thousands of identical oval shapes all pointing in the same direction. That is the kind of thing that looks very different from the air than it does on the ground, which is probably why it took so long to notice, even though the features themselves are enormous. The leading theories for how the Carolina Bays formed fall into a few broad categories. The oldest and most dramatic idea is that they were created by a meteor or comet impact, or by a series of impacts. The similar orientation of the bays and the raised southeastern rims suggested that whatever created them came from the northwest and struck the Earth at an angle. Under that view, each bay was either an individual impact crater or a splash crater formed when debris from a large impact hit the ground. That theory was dramatic and intuitive, and it was seriously considered for decades. It has largely fallen out of favor among geologists, because nobody has found the kinds of geochemical evidence you would expect at impact sites like shocked quartz, iridium anomalies, or tektite glass. The current scientific consensus leans toward the bays being formed by natural processes related to wind and water during the last ice age, around 12,000 to 15,000 years ago. The idea is that wind-driven currents in shallow bodies of water on the coastal plain shaped the bays, with the similar orientation reflecting the prevailing wind direction at the time. This explanation fits the evidence reasonably well, and it is a credible, conservative interpretation. It is also significantly less exciting than a comet impact, which most people will agree is a shame. What makes the Carolina Bays additionally interesting is that many of them have been drained and converted to farmland over the centuries, particularly in the Carolinas, where the rich, dark organic soils of the bay interiors are excellent for agriculture. The fact that so many have been destroyed means we will never have a complete picture of how many originally existed or how they varied across the landscape. The ones that remain, particularly in the Carolinas and along the coast, are ecologically important wetlands, supporting a wide range of plant and animal species. Some are among the last remaining examples of the longleaf pine savanna ecosystem, one of the most biodiverse ecosystems in North America and one of the most endangered. The honest scientific answer to what made the Carolina Bays is that we are fairly confident they formed over a long period through natural geological and hydrological processes, that the Ice Age played a major role, and that the specific mechanism is still being worked out. That is not exactly satisfying, but it is honest. The bays are old. They are numerous. They are strange. They are all pointing in the same direction for reasons that are genuinely not fully understood, and they are scattered across an enormous swath of the eastern United States, hiding in plain sight as wetlands and farm fields. That feels like exactly the kind of geographic mystery that deserves more attention than it gets. The United States is, geographically speaking, one of the most varied and unusual countries on Earth. It contains tropical islands and Arctic tundra, active volcanoes and ancient coral reefs, deserts and rainforests, and grasslands and swamps. But some of the most interesting things about the American landscape are not the famous ones. They are the canyon that should not exist in Georgia, the sunken forest on the Texas border, The coastline, actively disappearing into the Gulf of Mexico, the sand dunes hiding under Nebraska grass, the lake someone made by breaking a pipe, the town that has been on fire since 1962, and the hundreds of thousands of mysterious ovals pointing southeast across the coastal plain that scientists are still arguing about. The geography of this country is not finished, surprising you. Thank you for watching States Explained. If this video made you want to look up any of these places, I highly recommend you do. And if you live near any of them, I am genuinely a little jealous. Subscribe for more. Leave a comment letting me know which of these surprised you the most, and I will see you in the next one.